Hi, everyone. This is Chris Grosso with the Indie Spiritualist podcast, and my guest today is Dr. Carolyn Lovewell, formerly Elliot. Carolyn, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
So, going to read your bio quick for the listeners that aren't familiar with your monumental book, Existential Kink, and then we are going to get into a fun and engaging and I'm sure insightful conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So, Dr. Carolyn Lovewell, formerly Elliot, is the author of the best-selling book on shadow integration that rocked the coaching world, Existential Kink, Unmask Your Shadow and Embrace Your Power. She's the co-founder of the Immortal College, an organization dedicated to the revival of mystery culture via online teachings and also the world's only publicly offered in-person initiation in the Western esoteric tradition, Sleepover Mystery School. And Dr. Lovewell co-hosts the Sleepover podcast with Carolyn and is it Lila?
Layla, yeah.
Layla, available on all podcast platforms. She earned her doctorate in critical and cultural studies at the University of Pittsburgh and lives in her hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, with her family, who's getting ready for Halloween party tomorrow. Thank you, Carolyn, for joining us.
Thank you, Chris.
So, where to begin? First of all, I want to say thank you to my friend Jane. She is back in San Diego, where I recently moved from to Connecticut. And it was actually, we went out for lunch. I think it was like 3 days before I was flying home. It was a very bittersweet lunch. And we were talking a lot about some things that were going on in my life and places I was stuck. And one of them was I've been single for a little while. And, you know, I know that I'm a bit discerning in relationships because I am a relationship guy and I like to be mindful of that. But also I feel like I've been really patient. And she said, well, you know, maybe there's a party that kind of gets off on that. And I was like, what the fuck? No.
No.
And then she started telling me about this book, Existential Kink. And the more I try to be very open-minded and I trust her quite a bit, the more she was telling me about this, the more I'm like, whoa, okay, I can kind of see how that checks out. There's some weird shit inside that is attracted to this like unpleasant thing inside of me.
Mm-hmm.
And then she brought up that a lot of your work was rooted in Jung and Jungian's work, which shadow work for me has been huge. I love Jung. So then she really had my attention. And then, like I was telling you before we recorded, got the audiobook, and I've been pretty hooked since. So all of that said, can you give us, and we were just talking before we recorded, I know I don't want to ask you the questions you've been asked a million times, but for the listeners that aren't familiar with EK, Existential Kink, can you tell us a little bit about that process? What gave birth to that for you? Anywhere you want to go with that?
Sure, absolutely. Yes, well, thank you. I love this introduction that you gave, Chris, and how your friend got you interested in the concept. It is basically the most offensive concept when people first hear about it.
Yes.
So just to summarize for folks, so existential kink is the idea that pretty much all of us human beings have an unconscious attraction to painful things.
Yeah.
We're all kinky. We're all in a sadomasochistic relationship with the universe. And, the universe, God, whatever we want to call it, is a dom who has no safe words. It just keeps coming all the time. And we can learn, though, to make those unconscious attractions to painful or negative patterns conscious. And when we do that, we actually liberate all sorts of energy that had been kind of unconsciously stuck. And often those patterns can shift very dramatically. So existential kink is a deep tool for change. Sometimes people hear about it and they're like, oh, this is all just about wallowing in my problems. Like, no, it's not exactly, not really.
Right.
But the way it came about for me was I was in graduate school for critical and cultural studies, which is basically a degree in the humanities. So I had reading all sorts of stuff. I got really into continental philosophy, into psychoanalytical perspectives. So I was very familiar with these ideas about the unconscious. And also in grad school, I was suffering horribly, as everybody around me was
Right.
also. I was miserable. I was broke. I mean, I was living on like a $1,300 a month stipend for like 7 years of my early adult life.
Wow.
But it got even worse after I graduated because, of course, what jobs can you get with a PhD in critical and cultural studies? Well, any job you can get without.
Yes. Yeah.
So I was eligible for, minimum wage coffee shop jobs. And anyways, so I was in this state of being broke. I was couch surfing, I was dumpster diving, and I was so perpetually humiliated by it because I had friends, from college and high school who were, I don't know, they were living more normal lives somehow. They would invite me out to dinner and I would always be in a state of humiliation, wondering about, is my debit card going to go through, or am I going to, am I going to be able to pay my $100 in couch rent this month?
Yeah.
Really, I was not doing so well. And of course, my conscious mind thought that I wanted to have lots of money. I wanted to be rich. I wanted a life of luxury. But I had heard, I was familiar with this idea. At the time, I was also involved in a unity church. So unity is like New Thought Christianity, very
Right.
law of attraction, stuff. And so had these ideas simmering around in my mind, these sort of New Thought ideas about how desire creates reality. And I was just thinking, I was like, wow, I wonder if some part of me, I was standing in line at the food bank on a frigid December morning, awaiting in line for my government cheese.
I know that feeling. Yeah.
I was just like, wow, I wonder if some part of me really actually desires this. I was familiar with the idea from reading Jung and Freud of the unconscious mind. And I knew that it's possible to have completely unconscious desires, meaning desires that my ordinary self is completely unaware of. And I just began to get sort of gently curious. And at the same time, also, I was involved in what has now become it was at the time a scandalous sex cult, and it's now a fairly well-known scandalous sex cult, which is One Taste, which Nicole Daedone founded. And I was at the very peripheries of it, but I was doing the practice orgasmic meditation, and I was living in a group house that was dedicated to orgasmic meditation. And orgasmic meditation, the way that I like to think is a wonderful practice. So I think about it, how hot yoga is really cool, but like that guy Bikram wasn't very cool.
Yes, right.
Sort of like that. It's like the practice is really cool. This whole organization around it, I don't know. But so I was immersed in this practice, and the practice was teaching me really deep things about how the more vulnerable I could let myself feel, the more vulnerable I would let myself be, the more sensation I could feel in my body. So orgasmic meditation is a partnered practice where basically a stroker is stroking a woman's clitoris for 15 minutes in a very sort of rigorous, almost military precision style fashion. There's gloves, there's a timer, there's a specific kind of lube, there's a specific position. So it's almost this very sort of Zen style of tantric practice, I would say. So I was engaged in this practice. And there was a saying in that group, which is that the truth is orgasmic, and that, what else? There's this other wisdom there, which is that women were encouraged to get curious about their havingness level for orgasmic sensation, which means the range of sensation that one is willing to experience as pleasurable. So there was this well-known phenomenon in orgasmic meditation where, a stroker, somebody who'd been stroking clitorises for thousands of hours, would get familiar with there being sort of a magnetic spot where like finger would be drawn to clitoris in a specific magnetic kind of way. And I had experienced this many times myself, that there was this magnetism that would happen. And of course, you can experience that in regular lovemaking, but it became very apparent in this sort of like set practice container. And yet, sometimes it was also well known that it was possible for the stroker and the strokee to be in this place of magnetic resonance, but for the strokee, the woman, to not enjoy whatever that sensation was, even though that was the most magnetic resonance spot. And so there's this idea that there was an invitation to open up, experiment with opening oneself up to experiencing more, allowing more in as pleasure. And I could see the way that this was relevant to my whole life. I could see the way that there was a manner in which I had a very small window in general of sensation that I would experience as pleasurable. Like if somebody told me that I looked nice, I could take that in and experience that as pleasurable. If somebody told me I was absolutely gorgeous, that would just knock me out. That was like too much sensation outside of my zone. So I learned through this physical practice of orgasmic meditation how to open up so that I could receive this resonant magnetic touch, which at first was like way too much for me. Didn't know how to enjoy it. Right. I learned how to open up so that I could really enjoy it. And my, orgasmic potential expanded in this kind of psychedelic way. And I realized that must have an analogous relationship to my regular life.
Right.
And so I was thinking about that. And I was also thinking about that in connection with this, do I have an unconscious desire for this poverty that I'm experiencing?
Yeah.
And gradually I came to connect the two. And I realized that life always, life is the most perfect lover and is always stroking me in the most resonant, magnetic way. And if I can become honest enough and vulnerable enough about it, I can receive that stroke as a deep, loving touch. And I can have an orgasmic experience with it, whether that's a genital orgasmic experience or sort of a heart orgasm of gushiness or a laughter orgasm or crying. There's some response I can have to that is very direct and vulnerable and turned on, instead of being shut down and turned off, which is what was my habitual response to everything. Certainly my habitual response to, there's this bill and I don't know how to pay it, or I don't know how to tell these people that I just went out to dinner with that my card is completely in the negative.
Right.
It's like, so what I realized, with practice is that I could open up to the sensations of being, how do I say? Yeah, that there was a part of me that was completely romantically in love with the idea of being broke. Just found it so hot.
Yeah.
And I realized this actually one day because I was doing the work of Byron Katie. And in the work of Byron Katie, well, you're familiar with, probably a lot of your listeners are familiar with. You write down your judgments about stuff, you ask yourself questions about them, and you turn around your initial things that you wrote down. So at the time, I knew that I was being a creativity coach. I had written a book on creativity, which a lot of people really love. It's called Awaken Your Genius. So I'll just put that out there because that's my doesn't get as much attention as Existential Kink, but it's a great book too.
Glad you mentioned it.
I wanted to be a creativity coach and make a living that way. And I was sort of eking by, but I knew coaches through the orgasmic meditation movement who were making $1,000 an hour and who had tons of clients. And this blew my mind. I mean, these were people, a lot of them were in California, and I'd grown up in Pittsburgh, which is a very blue collar town where, my parents made $20 an hour working, taking care of mentally challenged people. And that was like my idea of what was possible. So anyways, I was working with this judgment with the work of Byron Katie, which was people should want to pay me $1,000 an hour for coaching. And I turned it around, I asked myself the questions. Is this true? Can I absolutely know that it's true? How do I react when I believe that thought? Who would I be without that thought? And then I got to the turnarounds. So I turned it around to nobody should ever want to pay me anything for coaching. And when I sat with that turnaround, I felt this huge erotic zing throughout my body. I was like, wow, yes. And then I realized, oh my gosh, Carolyn, you are so turned on by being financially devalued. Of course, you attract the experience of being financially devalued into your life because it does something for you. It actually fulfills you at a physical, somatic level.
Right.
So I discovered that I could set aside 15 minutes a day to just practice enjoying what was already happening, doing my best to set aside, my conditioned mind, my socialized ego, and all of its judgments about how horrible it was to be broke, how, how it shouldn't be happening, how I should have figured out a better career, and I was such a mess up and everything. And just focus on the actual sensations in my body and practice experiencing them with approval and turn on instead of with the shut down and the turn off.
Mm.
And I noticed that it was possible for me to have like these full body orgasmic experiences just on the fact that I had no idea how I was going to pay my share of the rent that month. And as I practiced this for a few weeks, I noticed it was very fast, actually. My identity started to change. And that's how a lot of the change that comes with existential kink really works, I think, is because it allows us to shift our identity from I've been identified as this very, I was like being tortured by fate and the universe. I was this put upon kind of sad person who was not being given what she wanted, into I realized that I was actually this very fulfilled person who was being given precisely the weird, specific thing that she wanted. And nobody else had to understand it. And nobody else had to approve of it. It was only me. And I like to emphasize that point because, Carl Jung talked so much about individuation. And I think that existential kink can be a very individuating practice because it really has a lot to do with giving consciousness and giving approval to these specific, shadowy, unconscious desires that the rest of the world would not approve of. Like nobody else was going to say to me, wow, Carolyn, how wonderful it is that you're so turned on about being broke. Wow, that's amazing. Nobody else was going to give me that. I had to give it to myself. Yeah. And so I've rambled a lot. Maybe I'll pause.
No, I'm following. So many things are coming up as you're talking about all of this. One is, after my friend Jane had told me about, the maybe you are there's a part of you that's attracted to this. And I was thinking back to, it was a couple months prior to that, a friend was in town from another state, and we'd been talking about getting together, and they ended up ghosting me, and I didn't make any plans that night. And I remember I just ended up walking around, and the sun was setting. It's a beautiful, San Diego evening, but I felt this overwhelming aloneness and depression and all this just unpleasantness. But there was a part of me that was so attracted to it, felt so comfortable and at home in it. And it's oh, that's kind of fucked up, that's kind of fucked up. So I'm sharing that though, because as you're saying, these things that are coming up for you and then you allow them to process through, that's part of what I appreciate in the book is it's not just about wallowing in this, these negative things. Once you actually dive into them, if I'm understanding correctly as I'm going through your book, it actually starts to root them through you and out and release these blockages, let's say, for lack of better wording. Is that correct?
Absolutely. That is correct. And there's many stories in the book of very dramatic transformations that people have. My transformation was super dramatic in that I went from squeaking by on $1,000 a month, sharing a house in Pittsburgh to, like I said, my identity changed. And once my identity changed, I became open to a whole range of ideas that I hadn't been open to before about things that I could do for my creativity coaching business. And I started to do them. And within 3 months, I was living in Bali and making $10,000 a month. And my life was completely different. And I was And so I was so stunned by that I had to start teaching other people about it.
Yeah, which I'm glad you did, because a lot of people that I've mentioned your book to is like, oh yeah, I've read that or I've heard of that. It's like, oh cool. And something you're very transparent about, which I really appreciate, and early on in the book, is you talk about your own history with addiction. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
person in recovery from alcohol, and I joke like I majored in alcohol, I minored in what do you got? Because that was me, like whatever, just take me out of me, and I'm good with that. And I do want to talk about the financial stuff too a little bit later, because that's a whole big area of question. But I have a lot of people that listen to the show that I know have come to this podcast because of their own struggles, and not just necessarily with substances, but mental health things and
Mm-hmm.
that nature. Do you mind sharing a little bit? And again, I appreciate like you. I'm drawing a blank, of course, but you gave that really great example of it was the old gosh, was it Hades or the Cast to Hell? And then you gave this comparison. It was so beautiful, but how you're talking about your life and how, maybe you weren't necessarily this victim. I'm not doing any semblance of justice to how you
That's
do in the book, but if
okay.
you could talk a little about that and how it relates, and for listeners that are struggling with things, how can this help them start to shift through that?
Oh, great. Wonderful question. Yes. So yes, I'm in 12-step recovery. I've been in and out of 12-step recovery for 20 years. I'm definitely
Sure.
better when I'm in it.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you.
And yeah, so the book Existential Kink opens with this sort of retelling of the story of Pluto and Persephone.
That's what I was looking.
And it's based on just some gnosis that I have. So in this traditional story that you can find in any book of Greek mythology, the idea is that Persephone is this maiden. She's the daughter of Demeter, the daughter of the goddess of the corn, basically. And she's in this beautiful Olympian meadow picking flowers. And one day there's this whoosh, huge earthquake, and the earth opens up, and out comes the king of the underworld, Pluto.
Right.
And he grabs her and he takes her to the underworld and ravages her and marries her. And then she's this like miserable ghost in the underworld. And she eats these pomegranate seeds, and the pomegranate seeds make it so that she has to, even after her mother comes and rescues her, she has to stay in the underworld for 6 months of the year. And then the other 6 months, she can go be with her mother on Mount Olympus. And that's how we have summer and winter. So my gnosis about that, which I suspect was part of what was communicated at the mystery school at Eleusis, which was sort of the center of Greek sacred life for, some scholars say, like 4,000 years.
Yeah.
Is that so? Persephone is kidnapped into the underworld, and she eats the pomegranate seeds, and she remembers herself when she eats the pomegranate seeds. She remembers that she is not just this helpless maiden who's been kidnapped. She is also Pluto. And this has to do with the historical fact that for thousands of years in Greece, there was no Pluto character. There was one person, one lord of the underworld, and that was Kore. Her name was Kore. She was the center of everything. She was the chthonic goddess. And so there was this splitting of the goddess into Persephone and Pluto, and then this reunion. And in that parable, in that story, what that communicates to me is this idea that going through life as this human, obviously we all start off as these vulnerable children, and very many of us have traumatic, terrible things happen. Even if we have the best families ever, just being in this screwy modern world is traumatizing.
Yeah.
So that we basically are all having that experience of being taken down into the underworld in some way. And I think addiction is one of the most swift ways down, right, into the depths of hell.
Sure is.
And when we're in those depths, as I've heard many people express at meetings, gratitude for their addiction, because it led them to find recovery and all of the love and support that's available in, 12-step recovery and in spirituality in general. Because oftentimes it takes that super intense underworld journey into hell before we become really receptive to deep spiritual truth in a way that we're not just giving lip service to it, but that it becomes this vital living reality. And one of the ways that a little bit of a scandalous perspective that I have about that, in 12-step circles, it's very common to speak about, people talk about their addiction and their higher power and, sort of like it's like almost like a Christian God and a devil at war with each other. And I hear that. I mean, certainly addiction's very devilish. And I have this little sneaking Jungian suspicion that what people, what becomes the sort of benevolent Santa Claus-like higher power that really arranges all of these beautiful synchronicities and loving, wonderful things. When folks get into recovery, there's often people are just blown away by how fast their lives come into a deeper harmony.
Yeah.
That power is identical with the power of the disease itself, of addiction. And it's all a matter of what kind of relationship am I in with that power. And, the first step is I admitted that I'm powerless over my addiction and my life had become unmanageable.
Right.
And I think it's that admission of powerlessness and that humility where the ego self realizes that it's, powerless of myself. I can do nothing. It's God who does all things through me. That realization changes the way that the power shows up. And what had previously been this destructive power greater than myself turns into this benevolent power greater than myself. And it's always the power greater than myself. And it's always willing to do benevolent things for me. But it's really a matter of what positional relationship am I in with. So that's my little scandalous pet theory about that.
I love it. You're in the right place for the scandal. So thank you for sharing that. So if someone, I know we're early-ish in the conversation, but can you give like a basic, not even, you don't have to guide a full EK meditation, but like I said, if someone's listening right now, even if they're in recovery, if they're still struggling, it's like, what's going on? I'm trying, things just aren't moving or working in the way I want. Is there a very basic instruction or anything you can offer to them that I love leaving our listeners, with something they can walk away from it besides a nice conversation, but something they can, a practical application in their life?
Absolutely. So what I would do, I'll just start dropping in for myself and listeners, and you, Chris, are certainly invited to follow along with me and take what's useful. So I just invite everybody to just tune into your body right now and notice where in your body are you feeling some kind of constriction, some kind of just resisting something in your life, in your experience, in yourself. And just take a deep breath and soften. Noticing that, feeling that. Some sense of, I don't like. I don't like this. I don't like, just some sense of resistance. So we're tuning into that don't like feeling. And now I invite you to just become very relaxed. Just take a deep breath in, deep breath out, let it all out. And ponder the spaciousness that you actually are. All of the atoms that make up all the cells of our bodies are actually mostly comprised of empty space. Put your attention on that empty space, where actually there's a certain way in which everything is very transparent, very, very just made up of energy swirling around. And putting one's attention on that constriction or that don't like feeling. See if you can really lovingly, really gently open up to the possibility that there's some part of you that takes a kind of deep pleasure in the bondage of this situation, that really likes feeling tied up and bound and limited and constricted by whatever the don't like situation is. See if notice if there's anything in your body that responds to that thought that says, yeah. Is there a little part of you that says yes? And there might not be. There might be, it might be like no part of me says yes to that. And so that's okay. If that's the case, just continue relaxing. But if there is some little part that says, maybe, then I invite you to talk very gently and lovingly to that part. You can begin by letting it know your desire to experience bondage, your desire to experience pain is just as important and beautiful and valid as any other desire that I have. Your desire for this constriction is perfect and beautiful. It's just as perfect and beautiful as a desire for sunshine and puppies and springtime. It's a perfect, wonderful desire. And you can let yourself know nobody else in the world has to be able to understand my desire for this situation. Nobody else needs to approve of it. Everybody else can think it's completely weird. Nobody else has to understand. I understand. I understand that for every conscious desire, I have an equally strong opposite unconscious desire. And my equally strong opposite desire is just as beautiful. This desire to experience scarcity, this desire to experience rejection, this desire to experience aloneness, this desire to experience failure, it has an incredible wisdom in it. It's connected to the desire for death. And the desire for death has an incredible wisdom in it. Just like Walt Whitman said, is it lucky to be born? I tell you, it's just as lucky to die. And I'll be silent for a moment while you open up to giving yourself permission to do this very taboo thing in our culture, which is to have love for the part of yourself that loves the energy of death, destruction, scarcity, aloneness, constriction, limitation, in a world where we're always supposed to want more and better and younger and hotter and richer, and just feel it. I'll be silent for a moment as you do so. Just really feeling appreciation and gratitude for this part that constricts, that says no. No to more. No to money. No to partnership. No to success. Whatever it's saying no to, it has a deep, beautiful wisdom in it. Sending deep love to the wisdom of this part of us. And right now, let's just continue to open up more. And let's open up to specifically feel the way that life as a lover is stroking us. So maybe there's a specific way that we're being touched right now. Life is giving us a specific situation that doesn't seem to feel good all the time. Tune into those sensations that the situation brings up. For me, I'm tuning into the way that my email list has been stuck at a specific number for a number of years, and it really frustrates me, and my mind tells me, oh, I want to have such a bigger email list. And when I tune in, there's this feeling of frustration, there's this feeling of stuck, there's this feeling of less than. And let that just be a stroke. That's the way the divine lover is stroking me right now. Can I open up? Can I soften to just receive the stroke without turning myself off, without resisting it? Can I fully receive this stroke of scarcity, rejection, failure, less than? And as I do that, is it possible for me to let myself become aware of some pleasure in there? It might be like the pleasure, sort of like when you were a kid and you had a loose tooth and you couldn't stop wiggling the loose tooth with your tongue, even though it hurt, it kind of felt good. It might be like that. Whatever it is, just be with it for a few moments, and I'll be silent while you do so. See if you can continue opening up the amount of approval and pleasure that you have for this sensation. Almost as if the sensation was like hot wax being dripped on you by God, with God here being the hottest lover in the universe. And we just open up to this pain, this hot wax, this stroke, and really, really savor it. Really completely receive it with just this wanton, slutty embrace. Yes. Yes. I'll be silent for a few moments as you practice this. And sort of to wrap us up, let's just take a moment to actually expand deeper. Just expand into your whole life. Just feel everything in your life. And really, become aware. When I become aware of my life, usually there's some part of my mind that tells me, oh my God, only a complete idiot could be grateful for all of this. And let's just experiment with being that complete idiot. Just being so totally dumb. Just absolutely just a dumb slut for God. Just really totally enjoying everything that's here and now, whatever it might be, unpaid bills, frustrations in relationships, tricky things in careers, tricky things with creativity, anything. Let's just take a few moments to really gratefully, ecstatically receive all of it. Now let's take a deep breath in, a deep breath out, and come back to full, awake presence, ready to go on with our days.
Dirty sluts for God. I love that. I took a lot more away as well, but thank you so much for going that deep into that. I honestly didn't expect that, and thank you. That was.
I could go all day.
I know you could.
Once you get me started, Chris.
Yes, I love that. Something I love about the work you're doing is I've been doing a really deep dive over this past year, maybe a little more, into internal family systems parts work from Richard Schwartz, as well as Gabor Mate's compassionate inquiry. And I feel, well, the three are all their unique, modalities, but I see a lot of crossover in them. And one of the major ones being, and this just came up for me while you were, guiding us through that really wonderful meditation. Thank you. Was Richard Schwartz wrote a book called No Bad Parts.
Mm-hmm.
So there are no bad parts in there. Like even that part you're talking about, that's, the bondage, let's let some wax drip onto that. Like, that's a part of us. Mm-hmm. Perhaps at, times might have led, for me, let's say there are parts that have certainly led me to act in very skillful ways in my life. But that's because as I'm getting to know these parts more, I've suppressed them. I've pushed them away. I've shunned them. Like they're like that poor redheaded stepchild bastard that, you just shove away. But as I start to actually become more intimate with them, which I love, this practice is such a wonderful way of doing that. It's okay that you're there. Let me get to know you better. Who are you? Hi, how have you been? I'm sorry I have not paid more attention to you. And honoring that, and then allowing that, to come up and work through. I don't know. I just thank you for that. Thank you. One thing also that I was while you're saying dirty sluts for God, I remember there was a part while I was listening to your book, and I don't remember verbatim. I mean, you're talking about God being this freaky, look at everything around. God is a freak. And then I'm like, well, I don't know about that. Isn't that just the egoic nature of humans that are just fucking things up? And then I'm like, well, wait, because this is me. I call it the fuckery committee. It's always on and on and on. And it's like, well, maybe that is right. Like, this is all happening. The beautiful, the terrifying, the horror, the joy, the ecstatic, orgasmic bliss. And yes, the just suffering in this world. It's all part of it. Where I'm going with this is that leaves me, to be honest, like, so what the fuck is wrong with God or higher power, or what's like amazing about, like, is this
Yeah.
really dysfunctional, fucked up thing that like now is morphed into what we are? And because if we're extension of this, um, because there
Oh
are
my
times I
God, Chris,
feel
I could talk to you for the next 4 hours about
yeah,
this.
I know, right? And yeah, so I mean, this is a big thing, but this is like, yeah, this is where my head goes. So I would love to hear just some thoughts on that. And
Oh, thank you.
yeah,
Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, I think about this literally all the time. So,
yeah,
where I've come to with it is, uh, so, Jung really emphasized a lot. He thought that in order for humanity to have any chance of not blowing itself up with nuclear bombs, what we needed to do, especially as Westerners, was lose the dualism of conventional Christianity
sure,
and really come into a deep understanding of non-duality in the sense that divinity isn't just the good guy, that
right,
divinity is the whole enchilada. It's all divine.
right,
And what one of the ways that I think of it lately is that um, there's this Kabbalistic idea that God withdrew in order to create the manifest world, that in some sense there was some withdrawal. And I think of that as God withdrawing actually into sleep, and that this world is God's dream, and we're
right,
all characters. We're all just like in our nighttime dreams. The characters in our nighttime dreams are all disassociated parts of our own psyche.
right,
We're all
right,
disassociated parts of God. And in order to become fully lucid, we need to literally remember ourselves and become reassociated. And that remembering process, I think, has to do with coming into, for me, it's been this ongoing realization of God needs my forgiveness.
mm,
The dream of the world needs my forgiveness. I mean, it doesn't, I don't know, in some sense, it doesn't need anything, but for me to be in right relationship with it, um, I need to come to a deeply surrendered, deeply forgiving place. And what I often think about is, let's see, how do I put this succinctly? Um, that there's a way in which the redemption happens when humans, well, the redemption has always already happened. And humans can become aware of this when we become really honestly aware of our own wholeness. So I've come to a place where, through studying the wisdom of interdependence, which so many, Eastern traditions of Buddhism emphasizes so beautifully, I've come to see that I'm completely interdependent with the worst criminals, abusers on the planet.
mm,
I've not in the idea that I'm, better than anyone or worse than anyone. I can really
sure,
see how the worst child abuser is, my existence depends on them being exactly as they are. They're doing a
right,
deep sacrificial service for me. I get to enjoy this beautiful, wholesome life in part because they're sacrificing themselves in the way they're sacrificing themselves.
right,
So interestingly, so Jung believed also that Westerners, after having, sought a lot of wisdom in Eastern traditions, actually needed to come back and have a new redemptive relationship with Christianity and actually evolve the symbols of Christianity um, into a new realization. And so I've been working on this very intensely. And for me, I've come to have a deep appreciation of the way in which the symbol of the incarnation of Christ and also the crucifixion and the
mm,
resurrection, I think is a very potent symbol that can still speak in a very useful way to Western modern consciousness that often feels so alienated and so separate from the really deep, loving, blissful dimensions of the divine. There's a way in which we are all the incarnation and we are all being crucified perpetually in space and time. We're all being crucified in this experience of the opposites, this experience of like, wow, all of this beauty on earth simultaneously, all of this horror, children being killed in these terrible wars,
yeah,
all sorts of stuff happening. And so the more that I get in touch with the fact that I'm crucified in every moment, and I'm also mysteriously resurrected as the self with a capital S, as, the self of the Upanishads,
Right.
or the Buddha nature, or, the second coming of Christ.
Right.
Like, there's a way in which I believe my personal belief is that humanity is destined to move from being a species with a collective unconscious to being a species that has a collective consciousness, where we are one conscious, organism, and each human realizes themselves as cells in part of this whole body of the anthropos, or the larger divine person. And anyways, really meditating on that traditional symbol of the cross. But actually what took me to that, this is going to be a long story.
I'm following you.
Started out by really meditating on, and this is also still an ongoing meditation, I've done a lot of work with Aleister Crowley and Thelema, that side of the Western esoteric tradition. And in fact, I have a picture of Babylon behind me.
Sweet.
But there's this image in the book of Revelation of Mystery, Babylon the Great. And she is drunk. She's riding a 7-headed beast. She's wearing robes of scarlet, purple. She is drunk on the blood of the martyrs of Jesus, which is also the blood of Jesus. And, it's usually conventionally taken to be this image of almost this like demonic presence. But I've come to a reading of the book of Revelation where it's very clear to me that Babylon is another image of Christ. In fact, she is an image of actually the Holy Spirit, the sexual birthing feminine that was excluded from the Holy Trinity. Like the Holy Spirit is like this, because you have a father. If you want to have a son, as everybody knows, you need a father and a ghost.
Right.
Which is actually, it's never made any sense.
No, but
it made zero sense. You need a father and a mother. And Babylon is Mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. And so there's this way in which I entered into, I guess, a deep tantric contemplation with Babylon, who is riding this beast with 7 heads, who represents basically, in my mind, all like Pan, like all of the manifest universe, all of the weird and wonderful things in the universe. She has tamed that beast, and she's drinking the Eucharistic wine, which is the blood of Christ, which means she is redeemed and full of grace and just as whole as anybody. But the thing is, she's not repentant. She's not covered in sackcloth and ashes. She is her full, happy whore self, and she is partaking of this redemption. So that, anyways, my whole thing, the hobby horse that I'm riding lately, is that, I do believe that symbol of Babylon astride the beast, drinking from the Holy Grail, is a symbol that is very potent, still scandalous and active for the Western psyche, that can lead us into a deep gnosis of the ecstatic love and the ecstatic union with the self with a capital S, with the Buddha consciousness, the Christ consciousness that is available to us. So anyways, that's my project, is sort of the Jungian project of renewing the symbol sets of Christianity and bringing them forward to work healing and reconciliation, hermetic reconciliation for the Western mind. So pondering Babylon and pondering the cross, that's actually but not in a conventional way.
Right.
In a really far out thelemic way. This is what I'm trying to say.
I love that you're doing that. I have, as far back as I can remember, not as far back, I was very atheist for early on in my life until I wasn't. I had a very deep experience with Christ, and something has always, since that moment, resonated with me. And I also have a deep reverence for all of the wisdom traditions, from Vedanta to Zen to Mahayana Buddhism or whatever. There's a lot of wonderful things, and I've taken a lot away from them. But I always particularly love, because I've seen so much bastardization of Christ's teachings, let's say. I love when I hear people like you talking about like re-examining these things through different lenses and what else can we find here? And so thank you for doing that. And something you said I want to go back to, because I know we're starting to get a little close on time, but when you're talking about recognize your independent nature, with beings that are, whether they're criminals or whatever it is, absolutely. I think about that often as well. Thich Nhat Hanh's work has been very influential in my life with, coming to understand interbeing, interconnection, and with all things. What part of what I've been exploring recently is, as I've been doing this work I mentioned earlier and going deeper inside, my last book was exploring this question of like, why do we continue to return to self-defeating behaviors, even though we kind of know better? We've had time away from them. Let's say you've been sober for a while, you relapse, eating, whatever it is, sex. What I've been looking at more recently, and this is actually kind of sparked by I was getting a tattoo done recently, and my artist, I hadn't seen him in a couple of years because I was in California, and I saw he had a new tattoo. It said "Stay Better" on his wrist, and I liked that. And we were talking about it, and he said, "Yeah, man, like people can always be better, but like, what about staying better?" And I was like, "Huh." Yeah, how about that? Because I've seen like my life, recovery or otherwise, has been anything but linear. It's made some wonderful progress and then fallen hard in ways and acted very unskillfully during those falls, and then coming back and trying to learn what's going on, and also extending forgiveness for myself and not knowing what I didn't know. It doesn't excuse things, but it's okay. Now, how can I take that and be a better human being and stay better? So I really, I want to thank him too. But I'm curious what your thoughts are in relation to the way you approach the world, the work you're doing, coming to know these parts of ourselves that, again, we might otherwise push away. How would you relate to that in a way of existential kink, or just in general, of like staying better as humans, so we can hopefully not blow ourselves up and get to that point of that collective conscious, which you're speaking of? I would love to get to that point. I also am I'll be honest, like, I don't know if we'll make it to that point. I am a realist, but I also have a penchant towards optimism, but I'm jaded and I don't know. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
It's certainly a big question mark, isn't it?
I know, yeah. Yeah.
Well, maybe I'm a Pollyanna, but I remember Ken Wilber talking about how he believed there was a certain, from what his understanding of how human consciousness has changed over the centuries, that once a certain amount of the population gets to a certain level, then very quickly the rest of the world seems to shift. And I think he estimated that was it 10% of the world needs to be an integral consciousness in order for there to be a big shift. And I think a few years ago, I heard him give an estimate that we were at about 5% integral consciousness, meaning people who are capable of seeing value in both things without having to devalue another, right? And I do find myself in the weird situation these days where, like, for example, the political life in the United States is extremely polarized. And my consciousness has gotten so weird and non-dual that I can genuinely look at both platforms and genuinely be like, they both sound great. Let's do both. Anyways, I can just see the value and see the love that comes in both perspectives. So anyways, that's a quick and dirty definition of integral consciousness. I don't think we need to devalue one side or another.
I love Ken's work.
Yeah. And that's very taboo right now. Culturally, it's taboo, but there's an increasing number of people who are, non-binary in all sorts of ways, gender non-binary, politically non-binary, just non-binary. And this hermaphroditic union of, that comes from making the unconscious conscious. And anyways, the internet exists And I think the internet actually does a phenomenal job of making the unconscious conscious to some degree. Of course, it can support our already existing prejudices. But there's a way in which we're perpetually becoming aware of things that we would not have been aware of otherwise. Mainstream media for a while was able to keep a very tight check on all sorts of narratives. And that has, anyways, there's all sorts of stuff just gushing forth in the collective awareness all the time. And I do think that in combination with various other things is forcing a kind of, or encouraging, to use a nicer term, a greater degree of synthesizing various perspectives and a waking up. And I do see, how do I say, even there's things that give me hope, even in, for example, like there's widespread interest in astrology right now. Like when I was a kid growing up, only the weirdest weirdos were interested in astrology. And now it's like huge. And astrology, of course, is a hermetic discipline. It's centered on the study of the reconciliation of opposites and the interplay of forces and the way that there's, a place and a role for everything. So that's a deep integral consciousness promoting thing. So I just have this feeling. I think we're going to do it. I think we're going to pull through. And, I know that you're out here on the front lines with this podcast, doing your best to contribute to, spreading the kind of ideas that make, a better world. And I think there's a lot of us doing that. And I think that, well, I don't know, either we could go up in a fiery ball and and I guess the universe will just try again elsewhere with another species. Or we pull through. I like to think we're going to pull through. There was some other bit in your question there that maybe I missed, but
you're tackling it great. I think the other part was, and I think we leaned more into the collective conscious and getting to that point, which is awesome. That's paramount importance. And you're like me, let's go into the big stuff, like bringing it back. Just the everyday, like from that being better to staying better, the everyday part. And thank you though for going where you did with that. But to tie that piece into this,
the staying better, I love that. So, question, what immediately comes to mind is, I think these sort of two parts of me, and then there's the one part that's like, work harder, work more to stay better, be better, work. And that part of me is like, well, of course, everybody needs to do dream interpretation. They need to do theurgy. They need to wake up at the crack of dawn and meditate. Anyways, there's that part of my mind. And then there's part of my mind that's like, well, it's all a complete gift of grace. And the more that I focus on the complete, insane love and grace and gift of it all, the more I spontaneously seem to be better.
I love that. Keep it simple. I love that. Thank you. So as we're almost basically out of time, I did want to ask you, I know we were talking about or in our emails, something I am very interested in is the a sleepover mystery school. Like, I want to sleep over at a mystery school. Let's hear about this.
Join us. Oh my God, you're asking about the best thing ever, Chris. The sleepover mystery school. That's the short definition. It is the best thing ever. I say that with all humility. It is something that I helped create with the Immortal College. And it is, so how do I, for your listeners and for you, so it is we're taking a break in 2025. We're going to do it again in 2026, but it is a 9-month initiation into the heart of the Western mysteries. It's a mystery school that has a direct lineage connection to the mysteries of Eleusis, to the Rosicrucians, to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and Thelema. And so it's a 9-month program. We have 4 in-person meetings that are sleepover events where you don't know until right before exactly where it's going to be. We take care of all of the food and all of everything. People hand over their phones. There is a vow of secrecy. There's a vow of silence.
Wow.
And we go into these ritual experiences that are designed to create an integration of the opposites within the psyche, which is how all ancient cultures did it. They had mystery schools of various sorts, especially in the Mediterranean, Northern Africa, the Levant. Mystery schools were the name of the game for about 4,000 years until imperial Christianity ruined the party. But that tradition didn't completely disappear. It went deep, deep underground, and it, was conveyed through an esoteric lineage that emerged in the at the end of the 19th century in London with the Hermetic Order of Golden Dawn. And from that current emerged Aleister Crowley and Thelema. And anyways, we are transmitters of what that current is. We transmit it very effectively. And there's people, so folks who are interested can go to the immortalcollege.com/sleepover mystery school. And they can see there's, fun information and testimonials on our webpage there. But basically, folks have this experience of melting down like caterpillars in a cocoon, turning into goo, getting reconfigured, reorganized, and emerging as butterflies. And it's so, I can barely put it into words. It's the most beautiful thing that I've ever seen. It's the most stunning, deeply, it's a group of people who are both deeply heart-centered, deeply sexual, turned on people, so fun, so utterly magical. And I just feel endlessly privileged to be associated with it. So I think the application form is up. If folks are interested in applying for our 2026 cohort, they can through the website. Also, if folks want to tune in to the podcast that I do with my friend Layla, I also sometimes have some other guests. It's called Sleepover with Carolyn and Layla. And we talk about all sorts of things associated with the mystery school. And we've had very many of our initiates from the mystery school have come on to the podcast, so you can hear people talking directly about their experiences as much as they can without violating their super serious vows of silence. But just to wrap it up real quick, a mystery school, I think it's important for everybody to understand, because sometimes people make an online course on tarot and call it a mystery school. Bless them. Online courses on tarot are wonderful, but that's not what a mystery school is. A mystery school, traditionally in antiquity, is a series of ritual initiations that does always involve a vow of silence and always involves the practitioners being ritually identified with a god and undergoing the experiences of the god and gaining a felt direct personal gnosis of the god. And as it was traditionally understood from initiates at Eleusis, received a felt direct bodily gnosis of immortality, and from that gnosis, a prosperous, happy life. So that is what Sleepover Mystery School offers. And it's a wild ride. So I highly encourage anybody interested to check out the podcast, check out the website. Definitely come join us, Chris. We have a wonderful time. Yeah.
It sounds that sounds something right up my alley. Thank you for the information where they can find that. Is there, before we close here in a moment, is there any other websites or anywhere, Instagrams and socials people can find you?
Great question. So I'm most active on X these days. I also have a YouTube channel that hopefully I'll do more on soon. I think my YouTube channel is still under my maiden name, Carolyn Elliott the Magician. And there's some stuff on there. My Instagram has a lot of stuff on it, but it's fairly inactive these days. That's at Carolyn Lovewell. On X, I'm also Carolyn Lovewell. The Immortal College website would really be the main place to go, because if people join the email list at the Immortal College website, they will get information about all of our classes and courses. We're probably going to do some in-person events in the springtime, even though we're taking a break, a year off of doing Sleepover Mystery School, we have a huge, thriving online communities dedicated to magic mysteries. So if an in-person thing isn't for you, there's just so much to do and be connected with online. And yeah, yay. Thank you.
Yay. Carolyn, thank you so much for a really lovely conversation. A slutty conversation. No, this was fun. Thank you so much. Listeners, please check out her work. Existential Kink is, definitely been an eye-opener for me. I'm very grateful for your presence and what you're bringing to the world. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Chris.